He divorced her 8 months ago because she couldn't give him children. Now, at a luxury resort with his new fiancée, one phone call destroys everything. His ex-wife is in labor with triplets he never knew existed. She hid the pregnancy after he humiliated and rejected her, carrying his sons in silence while he moved on. Now the crime lord who controls the city is racing against time to reach the woman he destroyed, before she disappears with his children forever. This is the story of a man who traded love for an empire, and lost everything that mattered. Hello everyone, I'm back with another Afro-Korean story that will break your heart and put it back together. Before we begin, help me reach 2,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you these emotional journeys. Now let's dive into this story. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The champagne tasted like victory. Jae-won stood on the terrace of the Azure Pearl Resort, his hand resting possessively on Yuna's waist, her diamond engagement ring catching the Miami sunset like a promise he intended to keep. 24 years old, flawless, fertile, everything his ex-wife wasn't. Everything he'd been told he needed. His empire stretched across 3 states now. His name made men disappear into silence. But when his phone vibrated in his pocket, something in his chest went still. "Excuse me," he murmured to Yuna, stepping away from the laughter of his associates, the clinking glasses, the performance of his perfect new life. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Kang." The voice was clipped, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Mercy General Hospital in Detroit. You're listed as emergency contact for Amara Osei." His blood turned to ice. Amara. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 8 months, hadn't let himself think it. She was a chapter he'd closed, a mistake he'd corrected. The wife who couldn't give him what he needed. The woman whose empty womb had humiliated him in front of his family, his organization, his father's ghost. "Why are you calling me?" His voice was blade sharp, controlled. "She's in active labor, sir. Triplets. High-risk delivery. She's been asking for—" The phone nearly slipped from his hand. "What did you say?" "Triplets, Mr. Kang. She's 32 weeks. We need consent for—" He didn't hear the rest. The world tilted. Triplets. His. They had to be his. 8 months ago, he'd signed the divorce papers in his office, his lawyer watching, his heart a stone. She'd stood there, her African print dress too bright for the cold room, her eyes dry because she'd already cried everything out. He'd told her it was over, that a man in his position needed heirs, that her body had failed them both. She'd looked at him like he'd killed something sacred, and she'd walked out without a word. He'd forced himself not to follow. "Where is she?" he demanded, his hand already signaling to his driver. "Mercy General, Detroit. But sir, she's refusing to—" He ended the call. Behind him, Yuna's laughter floated through the night air, crystalline and empty. The resort stretched out like a postcard of the life he'd constructed, beautiful, controlled, perfectly hollow. He didn't look back. The private jet was airborne within the hour. Jae-won sat in the leather seat, his hands gripping the armrests, his mind a hurricane of calculations that suddenly meant nothing. 8 months. She'd been pregnant when he signed those papers, when he'd told her she was worthless to him, when he'd looked at her like she was a failure. And she'd known. She'd carried his children and said nothing. The rage came first, hot and familiar. How dare she hide this from him? How dare she deny him his heirs? But underneath the rage was something colder, sharper, shame. He remembered the last time he'd touched her, the last time she'd looked at him with hope in her eyes, asking if they could try one more time, one more treatment. He'd said no. He'd said he was done wasting time on a woman who couldn't fulfill her most basic purpose. She must have already known she was pregnant, and she'd let him destroy her anyway. His phone buzzed. Yuna's name on the screen. He turned it off. The city lights below looked like dying stars. He'd built an empire on cold decisions, on knowing when to cut losses, on never looking back. But tonight, flying toward a woman he'd discarded and children he'd never known existed, Jae-won realized something devastating. He'd been looking back every single day, He just hadn't been honest enough to admit it. The hospital was chaos dressed in sterile white. Jaewon moved through the corridors like a storm in a tailored suit, his bodyguards flanking him, nurses scattering from his path. He didn't need to shout. His presence did the violence for him. "Amara Osei," he told the woman at the desk. "Where is she?" The nurse's hands shook as she typed. "Sir, visiting hours are—" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something quieter than a threat. "Tell me where she is, or I will buy this hospital and fire everyone in it before morning." She gave him the room number. 4th floor, maternity wing. His heart was a war drum. He'd divorced her because she was broken. Because 5 years of trying, of treatments, of her apologizing for her body's betrayal, it had shattered something in him. His father's voice in his head. A man without sons is not a man. A crime lord without heirs is just a king waiting to be overthrown. So he'd chosen power over her. And now, the elevator doors opened. He walked past rooms filled with new families, with joy he'd never let himself imagine. His hands were steady, but his breathing wasn't. Room 427. He stopped outside the door. Through the small window, he could see her. Amara. Her skin glowing with sweat, her hair in wild curls around her face, her body curved with the weight of 3 lives he'd never known existed. She was breathtaking. She was in pain. She was everything he'd thrown away. A nurse stood beside her, holding her hand. No family, no husband, no one, just her and his children. He pushed the door open. She looked up, and the world stopped. Her brown eyes, those eyes that used to look at him like he was more than the empire, more than the blood, more than the name, went completely cold. "Get out." Her voice was raw, exhausted, and utterly final. "Amara." "I said get out." She turned to the nurse, her breathing labored. "He's not on the visitor list. Remove him." The nurse looked between them, terrified. Jaewon didn't move. "Those are my children." "These," Amara said, her hand moving to her swollen belly, protective and fierce, "are my children. You made it very clear 8 months ago that you wanted nothing from a woman whose body was too broken to serve you." The words hit like bullets. "You hid this from me." She laughed, bitter and beautiful. "I hid them from you, from the man who told me I was worthless because I couldn't get pregnant. Guess what, Jaewon? I was already carrying 3 miracles the day you destroyed me, and I chose to protect them from you." A contraction seized her, and she gasped, her hand gripping the bed rail. He moved forward instinctively. "Don't you dare touch me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't get to be here for this. You don't get to pretend you care. I'm their father. You're a stranger who threw away his family because we didn't meet your requirements." The nurse looked at him, apologetic and firm. "Sir, if she doesn't want you here, leave us," he said quietly. The nurse hesitated. "Now?" She left. Amara's eyes blazed. "You think you can just command everyone? Even here?" "I think," he said, his voice raw in a way it hadn't been in years, "that I made the worst mistake of my life when I let you go." Her laugh was broken glass. "You didn't let me go. You threw me away like I was garbage. Like 5 years of loving you meant nothing because my body didn't perform on your schedule. You thought I was defective, useless, not woman enough for the great Jaewon Kang." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "And now you think you can walk back in because suddenly I'm useful? Because I'm carrying the heirs you wanted so badly? It's always been about what you need. What your empire needs, what your father's ghost needs." Another contraction. Harder this time. "Well, these boys are mine. I carried them alone. I love them alone. And I'll raise them alone." The machines around her started beeping faster. He reached for her hand. She pulled away, but her body was betraying her, the pain overwhelming. And when the next wave hit, she had no choice. Her fingers found his, and squeezed. And in that moment, with her hand in his and his children fighting to enter a world he'd almost missed, Jaewon felt his empire become meaningless. All the power he'd accumulated, all the fear he'd inspired, all the men who'd disappeared at his word. None of it could undo what he'd done to her. None of it could give him back the 8 months he'd missed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She didn't answer. She just held his hand and screamed. The delivery room was a cathedral of pain and possibility. Jaewon stood beside Amara, her hand crushing his, her screams tearing through him like penance. The doctors moved with urgent precision, their voices calm and controlled. But he could see the worry in their eyes. 32 weeks is early, one of them said. "We need to get them out now." Amara's body shook. "Are they okay? Please? Are my babies okay? We're doing everything we can." Jaewon felt helpless in a way no weapon, no money, no power had ever made him feel. This woman he'd discarded like she was nothing, was fighting for the lives of children she'd carried alone, children she'd protected from him, children she'd loved enough to hide. "I'm here," he said, his voice breaking. "Amara, I'm here." "I don't want you here," she gasped, but her hand tightened around his. "I don't," she screamed. "First baby's crowning," the doctor announced. Time fractured. Jaewon watched, his hand still in hers, as the first of his sons entered the world. Tiny, impossibly fragile. His cry a sound that rewrote everything Jaewon thought he knew about strength. "It's a boy," the nurse said softly, wrapping him in a blanket. Amara sobbed, reaching for him. They placed the baby on her chest for one precious moment before taking him to the incubator. Her face, God, her face, was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Love and terror and exhaustion and fierce, unbreakable joy. 2 more, the doctor said. "You're doing beautifully." 10 minutes that felt like a lifetime. The second son arrived, smaller than the first, his lungs fighting for air. The medical team worked quickly, efficiently, their movements choreographed by urgency. Then the third, the smallest, the fighter. 3 boys, 3 miracles. 3 reasons Jaewon's empire suddenly felt like a cage he'd built around nothing. The room filled with the sounds of medical equipment, of tiny cries, of Amara's exhausted weeping. She looked at the incubators where their sons lay, so small and perfect and terrifying. "Are they breathing?" she asked, her voice raw. "Please tell me they're breathing." "They're fighters," the doctor said, just like their mother. Jaewon stood there, his hand still holding hers, looking at the 3 tiny boys who'd just destroyed and rebuilt his entire world in the space of an hour. He'd wanted heirs. He'd demanded sons to carry his name, his empire, his legacy. But looking at them now, so fragile, so dependent, so completely innocent, he realized he'd never understood what fatherhood meant. It wasn't about legacy. It was about this. About standing beside a woman you'd destroyed and watching her give everything to bring life into the world. About 3 boys who didn't care about empires or power or names. They just needed to breathe. Amara turned her face toward him, her eyes exhausted and wary, and still so beautiful it hurt. "You need to leave," she whispered. "Amara, please." Her voice cracked. I can't do this with you here. I can't let you in just to have you walk away again when things get hard." "I'm not walking away." "You already did. 8 months ago, you walked away from me. From us. You don't get to come back now just because it's convenient." A nurse approached him, gentle but firm. "Sir, she needs to rest. The babies need to be monitored. Perhaps—" He looked at his sons, so small in their incubators, fighting for every breath. He looked at Amara, the woman who'd given him everything, and received nothing but cruelty. "I'll come back," he said. She closed her eyes. "Don't." "I will." "Then that's your problem." He wanted to argue, wanted to demand, wanted to use every tool in his arsenal to force his way into their lives. But for the first time in his life, Jaewon understood that some things couldn't be taken, They had to be earned. He leaned down, his lips close to her ear. "I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me," he whispered. "And I'll spend the rest of my life proving I've changed, whether you forgive me or not." She didn't respond, but he felt her hand tremble in his. He left the room, his bodyguards falling into step behind him, and pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls from Yuna. He deleted her number. Then he called his lawyer. "End the engagement, pay her whatever she wants, and clear my schedule for the next 6 months." "Sir?" "I have sons now," Jaewon said, his voice steady for the first time in 8 months. "And I have a war to win. Not with weapons, not with fear, with something far more terrifying. Love." Jaewon didn't leave the hospital. He should have. He had an empire to run, enemies to crush, a fiancée whose heart he'd just broken via a lawyer's phone call. But none of that mattered anymore. His sons were in the NICU, fighting for every breath. And Amara was 3 floors above them, recovering from a battle she'd waged alone. He stood outside the NICU observation window at 3 a.m, his suit jacket discarded, his tie loosened, his hands pressed against the glass like a man trying to touch something he had no right to claim. 3 incubators. 3 tiny boys. The nurses had told him their weights, their APGAR scores, their prognoses. Baby A, the firstborn, was the strongest. Baby B had underdeveloped lungs. Baby C, the smallest, had a heart murmur they were monitoring. He didn't know their names. Amara hadn't told him. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" He turned. A nurse stood beside him, her scrubs decorated with cartoon elephants, her eyes kind and exhausted. Her name tag read, Rosa. "Yes," he said, his voice rough from hours of silence. "You're the father." It wasn't a question. "I am." Rosa looked at him with the kind of gentle judgment only medical professionals could deliver. "She won't let you see her." "I know. She's been asking about them every 20 minutes. Trying to get out of bed even though she can barely stand. She's terrified." Jaewon's chest tightened. Will they be okay?" "Too early to say. Premature triplets are always high risk. But they're fighters." She paused. "Like their mother." He wanted to say he was a fighter too, that he'd built an empire from blood and fear, that he'd survived wars most men couldn't imagine. But standing here, watching his sons struggle for life, he felt more powerless than he'd ever been. "Can I—" He stopped, the question foreign on his tongue. "Can I go in?" Rosa studied him. "Are you asking permission?" "Yes." Something shifted in her expression. "Wash your hands. Follow the protocol, and don't touch them unless I say you can." He followed her instructions like a soldier taking orders. Inside the NICU, the world was beeps and whispers, and the soft crying of babies too small to understand they were supposed to be terrifying. Jaewon moved past other incubators, other families, other vigils, and then he was standing over his sons. Up close, they were even more devastating. Baby A had Amara's nose. Baby B had his mouth. Baby C, the smallest, had dark hair that stuck up in wild tufts like Amara's did when she slept. "You can talk to them," Rosa said softly. "They can hear you." Jaewon had given orders that toppled governments, had spoken words that ended lives, had negotiated deals worth billions. But he had no idea what to say to 3 boys who weighed less than his Rolex. "I'm your father," he finally whispered, his voice breaking. "And I'm sorry I wasn't there." Baby C's tiny hand moved, fingers stretching toward nothing. Jaewon reached out, then stopped. "Can I—" Rosa nodded. He slipped his finger into his smallest son's palm. The baby's hand closed around it. And Jaewon, the man who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, felt tears slide down his face for the first time in 20 years. "I'm going to protect you," he whispered. "All 3 of you. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know if your mother will ever forgive me. But I swear on everything I am, I will never abandon you again." Baby C held on. Rosa touched his shoulder gently. "You should rest." "I can't." You need to. Because when she's ready to talk to you, and she will be eventually, you need to be strong enough to handle what she's going to say. He looked at her. You think she'll forgive me? I think, Rosa said carefully, that forgiveness isn't something you earn in a night. It's something you build, day by day, choice by choice. And right now, she's watching to see if you'll stay, or if you'll disappear the moment things get hard. I'm staying. Then prove it. Jaewon stayed in that hospital for 3 days. He commandeered a conference room and turned it into a makeshift office. His men brought him files, updates, problems that needed solving. He handled everything remotely, his empire running on autopilot while he lived in sterile hallways and watched his sons breathe. He ate cafeteria food. He slept in chairs. He wore the same clothes until one of his bodyguards brought him fresh ones. And every 6 hours, he stood outside Amara's room and asked if she'd see him. Every 6 hours, the answer was no. On the 4th day, baby B's oxygen levels dropped. Jaewon was in the NICU when the alarm started, when doctors swarmed the incubator, when Rosa's calm voice became urgent and clipped. We need to intubate. Get respiratory down here now. He stood frozen, watching them work on his son, his second-born, the one with underdeveloped lungs, the one who was supposed to get stronger but was getting worse. Someone grabbed his arm. Sir, you need to step back. That's my son. I know, but you need to let us work. He didn't move, couldn't move, until he heard her voice. Jaewon. He turned. Amara stood in the doorway of the NICU, held up by a nurse, her hospital gown hanging off her frame, her face pale and terrified and furious. What's happening to my baby? Their eyes met. And for the first time since he'd walked into that delivery room, she looked at him like she needed him. Come here, he said, reaching for her. She hesitated. Please. She crossed the room, and he caught her as her legs gave out, holding her up while they both watched doctors fight to save their son. He's going to be okay, Jaewon whispered, his lips against her hair. He's going to be okay. You don't know that. I know he's ours, and we don't give up. She was shaking in his arms. This woman who'd survived him, who'd carried 3 lives alone, who'd chosen to protect their children even when it meant losing everything. If he dies, she started, he won't. But if he does, it's because I went into labor early, because my body failed them again. He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes burning into hers. Your body grew 3 miracles. Your body fought to keep them alive for 32 weeks alone. Don't you dare call that failure. She stared at him, tears streaming down her face. I'm the failure, he said. Not you. Never you. The doctor looked up. We've stabilized him, but he needs to stay intubated for now. Amara collapsed against Jaewon's chest, sobbing, and he held her. Not because he had the right to, but because for the first time in 8 months she was letting him. They sat in Amara's hospital room at dawn, 2 strangers who'd created 3 lives. She was in the bed, exhausted and weary. He was in the chair beside her, his empire waiting on hold while he figured out how to win back the only thing that mattered. We need to talk about custody, she said finally. His heart stopped. Amara, I'm not keeping you from them. I won't do that to my sons. She looked at him, her eyes hard. But I need to know what you want. Because if this is about your empire needing heirs, if this is about your reputation or your family name, I need to know now. It's not. Then what is it? He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. When I signed those divorce papers, I told myself I was doing the right thing. That a man in my position couldn't afford weakness, couldn't afford to love someone more than the empire. I'm not asking for your life story. I'm giving it to you anyway. His voice was raw. My father built our organization on one rule. Family is everything, but only if that family makes you stronger. He had 3 sons. I watched him choose which one of us mattered, based on who could be the most ruthless. Amara's expression softened slightly, but she didn't speak. I wasn't the firstborn. I wasn't supposed to inherit. But I was the one who could make the hard choices, the one who could cut off emotion and do what needed to be done. He met her eyes. So when you couldn't get pregnant, when year after year we failed, I made the hard choice. I cut you off. And now you regret it. Now I realize it was never a hard choice. It was a coward's choice. He stood, moving to the window, looking out at the city that feared his name. I threw away the only person who ever loved me for who I was instead of what I controlled. And I did it because I was terrified. Of what? Of being my father. Of choosing empire over family and ending up alone in a mansion full of people who only stay because they're paid to. Silence. My sons are 4 days old, he continued, and I've already failed them. I wasn't there for their first breaths. I didn't hold your hand during the pregnancy. I didn't protect you when you needed me most. No, Amara said quietly. You didn't. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. She laughed, bitter and broken. For how long? Until they're not cute anymore? Until running an empire gets boring and you remember you have responsibilities? Until I die. The certainty in his voice made her flinch. I don't believe you. Then let me prove it. How? He turned to face her. Let me be their father, not on paper, not through lawyers and custody agreements. Let me show up. Let me change diapers and lose sleep and learn how to be what they need. And what about what I need? The question hung in the air like smoke. Tell me, he said. Tell me what you need, and I'll give it to you. I needed you 8 months ago. I needed you to look at me and see more than a womb. I needed you to love me even when I couldn't give you what you wanted. I did love you. Not enough. The words were a knife between his ribs. You're right, he said. I didn't love you enough. I loved my father's approval more. I loved the empire more. I loved the idea of legacy more than I loved the woman who was my legacy. Amara closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. But I'm asking you to let me try again. Not to be your husband. I know I destroyed that. But to be their father. To be someone they can count on. And if you leave again? I won't. You don't know that. People don't change, J1. Not really. You're still the man who built an empire on fear. You're still the man who makes people disappear. I'm still the man who spent 4 days sleeping in hospital chairs because I can't stand to be away from my sons for more than an hour. His voice broke. I'm still the man who held your hand while you screamed. I'm still the man who's terrified every time baby B's oxygen monitor beeps. She looked at him, really looked at him, and he let her see everything. The exhaustion, the fear, the desperate, aching need to be more than what his father made him. I don't trust you, she whispered. I know. I don't forgive you. I know. And I don't love you anymore. That one hurt more than he expected. I know, he said anyway. But, she took a shaking breath, but they deserve a father. And if you're willing to prove you've changed, I'm willing to let you try. Hope flared in his chest, dangerous and bright. What are their names? He asked. She smiled for the first time since he'd walked into her delivery room. You want to know their names? I want to know everything. Kojo, Kwame, Kofi. He repeated them softly, tasting the syllables. Ghanaian names, strong names. Names that connected them to her heritage, her strength, her survival. They're perfect, he said. They're mine, she corrected. And if you want to be part of their lives, you follow my rules. You don't make decisions without me. You don't use your money or your power to override me. And you don't introduce them to your world until I say they're ready. Agreed. I mean it, J1. I mean it. The first time you put them in danger. The first time you choose your empire over them. I'll choose them. Every time. She searched his face for the lie. Found only truth. Okay, she whispered. Okay. He wanted to touch her. Wanted to pull her into his arms and promise her the world. But he'd learned something in these 4 days of watching and waiting. Some things couldn't be taken. They had to be earned. So he just nodded and stayed. 2 weeks later, baby B, Kwame, was strong enough to breathe on his own. The doctors removed the intubation tube at sunrise, and Amara got to hold him for the first time without wires and monitors between them. She sat in the rocking chair by the observation window, her hospital gown replaced by real clothes now, jeans and a soft purple sweater that made her skin glow. Jaewon watched from the doorway, his heart in his throat. She was crying. Happy tears this time. Relief tears. The kind of tears that came after 2 weeks of terror, of watching monitors, of praying to gods she wasn't sure were listening. Kwame fit perfectly against her chest, his tiny body finally free of tubes, his breathing steady and strong. "You can come in," she said softly, not looking up. He crossed the room slowly, carefully, like approaching something sacred. He'd learned to move differently in these weeks. Softer, quieter. The man who used to command through presence now tried to disappear into corners, to be there without taking up space that wasn't his to claim. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked. His hands shook. "I don't know how. Neither did I 2 weeks ago. We'll learn together." She stood carefully, moved closer, and showed him how to support Kwame's head, how to cradle him against his chest, how to breathe through the terror of holding something so small and perfect and utterly dependent. Kwame fit in his hands like he was made to be there. The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, but somehow already knowing. Jaewon felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked away since childhood, since his father first told him that love was weakness and family was a tool for power. "He looks like you," Amara said, her voice soft. "He has your strength. He has both our stubbornness. The nurses say he fights every diaper change like it's a personal insult." Jaewon laughed, the sound still foreign but getting easier. "Sounds like a Kang. Sounds like an Osei, too." They stood there, the three of them, in a moment that felt stolen from someone else's life. Outside, the Detroit winter pressed against the windows. Inside, warmth and possibility hung in the air like a promise neither of them knew how to keep yet. Then Jaewon's phone rang. The sound shattered the peace like glass breaking. He glanced at the screen, his second in command. The call he'd been dreading for 14 days. "I need to take this," he said, his voice tight. Amara's expression shuddered immediately, all the softness draining from her face. "Of course you do. Amara, just go. Some things never change." The disappointment in her voice was worse than anger would have been. He wanted to throw the phone out the window, wanted to ignore it and stay in this moment where he was just a father holding his son. But he knew what this call meant, what was waiting on the other end. "I'll be right back," he said, carefully handing Kwame back to her. She took the baby without looking at him. "Take your time. We're used to you not being here." The words were designed to hurt. They worked. He stepped into the hallway, the door closing behind him with a soft click that felt like a judgment. He walked past nurses and families, past the bulletin board covered in photos of NICU graduates, past the life he wanted and toward the one he'd built. He answered on the 5th ring. "We have a problem," his second-in-command said without preamble. Viktor Kozlov, the man who'd been with him since the beginning, who'd helped him build an empire from his father's ashes. "The Volkov family is moving on our territory in Chicago. They hit 3 of our locations last night. They're saying you've gone soft, that you're distracted, that a crime lord who abandons his empire for babies isn't a crime lord at all." Jaewon leaned against the wall, his free hand pressed to his forehead. "Casualties. 2 dead, 5 injured. They're sending a message, Jay, and everyone's watching to see how you respond." Behind him, through the window, he could see Amara rocking Kwame, her face turned away. In the incubators, Kojo and Kofi slept, unaware that their father was choosing their future with every word. "If you don't respond soon, if you don't show them you're still the man who built this empire, we'll lose everything," Viktor continued. "Miami, Detroit, Seattle, all of it will fall. They'll carve us up like we're nothing. Handle it." Silence on the other end. Then, "Sir, you heard me. Handle it. Negotiate. Compromise. Pay them off if you have to. But I'm not leaving this hospital. Jay, you can't be serious. You know what your father would say. You know what this makes you look like. Jaewon closed his eyes, heard his father's voice as clearly as if the old man were standing beside him. A king who abandons his throne is just a man waiting to be overthrown. Family is a tool, not a master. Power is all that matters. My father, Jaewon said slowly, died alone in a mansion surrounded by people who only stayed because they were paid to. He had 3 sons, and none of us held his hand at the end. Is that the legacy you think I should follow? That's not fair. It's the truth. He chose power over people every single time. And where did it get him? A funeral with 1,000 attendees, and not one person who actually mourned him. Victor's breathing was harsh on the other end. So what? You're just going to let the Volkovs take everything? You're going to prove them right? That you've gone soft? Jaewon looked through the window again. Amara was singing now. He couldn't hear it, but he could see her lips moving, could see the gentle sway of her body as she rocked their son. The same woman he'd told she was worthless. The same woman who'd grown 3 miracles alone. Then we'll lose it, he said calmly. Certainly. The territory, the power, the empire, all of it. What? I said we'll lose it, because I'm not choosing the empire this time. I'm choosing them. You can't be serious. You've spent 20 years. I've spent 20 years building something that would outlast me. Something that would prove I was more than my father's second choice. And all I have to show for it is blood on my hands and a woman who can't stand to look at me. His voice broke. I'm done, Victor. I'm done choosing power over the only things that actually matter. They're babies. They won't even remember if you're there or not. But I will. And more importantly, their mother will. And she's already given me more chances than I deserve. I'm not throwing away another one. Victor was quiet for a long moment. If you don't come back, if you don't show your face and remind everyone why they fear the Kang name, you won't have an empire to come back to. You understand that, right? I understand. And you're okay with that? Jaewon thought about the question. Really thought about it. Was he okay with losing everything he'd built? The respect, the fear, the power that made his name a weapon? He looked at Kwame, at the tiny chest rising and falling with breath that had been uncertain just hours ago. Yeah, he said. I'm okay with that. Then you're a fool. Probably. But I'd rather be a fool with a family than a king with nothing. He ended the call, turned off his phone, and stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the weight of what he'd just done settle over him. He'd just signed the death warrant for his empire. The Volkovs would see his absence as weakness. His own people would scatter like rats from a sinking ship. Everything his father built, everything he'd grown, it would be gone within months, and he felt lighter than he had in 20 years. He went back inside. Amara looked up, surprise on her face. That was quick. It wasn't important. Liar. She could read him too well, even after all this time. I saw your face through the window. Something's wrong with your business. He sat beside her, close enough to touch but not touching. Not yet. Something's right with my life. For the first time in years, something's actually right. She studied him with those eyes that had once looked at him with love, now filled with wariness and hope and fear all tangled together. What did they want? They wanted me to come back, to defend the empire, to prove I'm still the man everyone fears. And I told them no. Kwame made a small sound against her chest. Not quite a cry, just a noise that said he was there. He was alive. He mattered. You're going to lose your empire, Amara said quietly. Probably. That's what you wanted more than anything. More than me. More than us. I was wrong. He reached out, his finger brushing Kwame's tiny hand. The baby's fingers closed around his, holding on with surprising strength. I spent my whole life building something that would outlast me. Something that would prove I mattered. That I was more than my father's second choice. More than the son he kept around because I could make the hard choices he was too weak to make himself. Jaewon, but this, right here, this is what outlasts me. Not territory or power or fear. Them. These 3 boys who don't care that I control half the underground in 3 states. They just care that I'm here. That I show up. That I don't disappear when things get hard. Amara's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back, trying to stay strong, but he could see the way her walls were cracking. You're really staying. I'm really staying. Even if it costs you everything? It already cost me everything once. When I let you walk out 8 months ago. When I chose pride and power over the only person who ever loved me for who I was, instead of what I controlled. He finally looked at her fully, let her see every raw, desperate truth. I won't make that mistake again. I can't. She was quiet for a long moment, rocking Kwame, processing. Then, there's a position open at my brother's security firm. It's legitimate, legal. Boring corporate protection work for tech companies and executives who are paranoid about kidnapping. He blinked, not sure he'd heard right. I want you to have a choice. You can go back to your empire and prove you're still the crime lord everyone fears. You can fight the Volkovs and whoever else comes for you. You can die for power, like your father did. She adjusted Kwame in her arms, her voice steady. Or you can walk away, build something new. Something clean. Something our sons won't have to run from or be ashamed of when they're old enough to understand what their father was. Your brother would hire me, after everything I am. He owes me. I paid for his MBA when our parents died. I helped him start the firm when no bank would touch him. A small smile. And he's terrified of you, so that helps. He knows you could protect his clients better than anyone else in the city. Jaewon laughed. The sound still foreign but getting easier each time. I don't know how to be normal. I don't know how to be the guy who goes to an office and files reports and comes home for dinner. Neither do I. I'm a single mother of triplets who hid a pregnancy from a crime lord because I was too proud to tell him the truth. Normal left us a long time ago. He reached out, hesitated for just a second, then took her hand. She didn't pull away. Her fingers were warm, slightly trembling, but they held on. If I do this, he said carefully, if I walk away from everything I built, from everything my father created, I need you to understand, it's not because you asked me to. It's not because I'm trying to buy my way back into your life. It's because I want to. Because I want to be the man our sons can be proud of. The man you deserved 8 months ago. And if you resent me for it later, when you're sitting in some corporate office and you remember what it felt like to have power, I won't. Because the only thing I've ever resented was the choice I made to let you go. Every other choice, every piece of power I grabbed, every enemy I crushed, it all led me here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Amara looked at their hands, intertwined, calloused and soft, blood-stained and clean. She looked at Kwame sleeping peacefully between them, his tiny face so perfect it hurt. I still don't trust you completely, she whispered. I know, I'll earn it. Every single day. I still don't forgive you for everything you said, for how you made me feel. I know, and I'll spend my life making it right. I'll prove that you weren't the failure I was. And I still don't love you. That one hurt more than he expected. More than losing the empire. More than his father's voice in his head calling him weak. But he understood it. I know, he said anyway, his voice soft. But maybe someday you could again. Not the way you did before. I don't deserve that back. But something new. Something we build together. She didn't answer right away. But she didn't let go of his hand either. And when Kojo started crying in his incubator, she said, Go get your son. He needs you. Not the baby. Not my son. Your son. Jaewon stood, crossed to the incubator, and lifted Kojo for the first time without a nurse supervising. The baby was still so small, still had a feeding tube, but his eyes opened and looked at his father like he knew him. Hey, Jaewon whispered. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Kojo made a small sound. Not quite a cry. Not quite contentment. Just acknowledgement. Behind him, Amara watched with tears streaming down her face. This was how healing started, not with grand gestures or perfect words, but with showing up, with staying, with choosing the hard, quiet, unglamorous work of being present. 3 days later, J1 walked into his organization's headquarters for the last time. The building was downtown Detroit, unmarked, unremarkable, just another office complex that happened to control the underground of 3 states. His lieutenants were waiting in the conference room. Victor stood at the head of the table, his face grim. "You actually came," Victor said. "I told you I would." "I thought—" Victor shook his head. "I thought maybe you'd come to your senses." J1 set his briefcase on the table. Inside were papers, transfers, designations, the systematic dismantling of everything he'd built. "I have," he said simply. "I'm out." The room erupted. "You can't just walk away. We'll be slaughtered. Your father would—" "My father," J1 said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, "is dead, and his legacy died with him. I'm building something different." He opened the briefcase, started distributing papers. "I'm transferring my holdings to Victor. The Chicago territories, the Miami connections, the Seattle operations, all of it. You want to fight the Volkovs? Fight them. You want to expand? Expand. But you do it without me. This is insane. This is the sanest thing I've ever done." For 2 hours he signed papers, transferred assets, designated successors. Burned bridges he'd spent 20 years building. His hands were steady. His resolve was absolute. When it was done, when he'd dismantled everything his father had created and he'd grown, Victor leaned back in his chair and studied him. "You're really doing this. For a woman who doesn't even love you anymore. For babies who won't remember whether you were there or not. I'm doing this for myself. Because I'm tired of being my father's son. I'm tired of building empires on fear and calling it strength. You'll regret this. Maybe. But I'll regret it as a free man, not a prisoner of my own legacy." He stood, picked up his briefcase, now empty except for one photo, the one the hospital took of his 3 sons together, the one Amara had given him with tears in her eyes. "Good luck," he said to the room. "I mean that." Victor stood too, extended his hand. They shook. "You were the best king I ever served," Victor said quietly. "Then I'm glad I quit while I was ahead." J1 walked out of that building for the last time. His phone had 17 missed calls. One was from Amara. Kojo just smiled. "I think it was gas, but I'm calling it a smile. You should be here." He was in his car before he finished reading. The hospital was across town. Traffic was hell. Detroit winter meant black ice and caution and slowness. He didn't care. He drove like a man with somewhere to be, someone to be. He parked, ran, took the stairs 2 at a time because the elevator was too slow, burst into the NICU slightly out of breath, his tie askew, his carefully constructed crime lord image completely shattered. Amara looked up from where she sat between the incubators, a smile playing at her lips. "You came. You called. I didn't think, after what you've been doing today. There's nothing more important than this, than them, than you." She stood slowly, crossed to him, and for the first time in 8 months, she touched him first. Her hand on his cheek, soft, careful, testing. "Tell me this is real," she whispered. "Tell me you're not going to wake up tomorrow and regret everything. Tell me you're not going to resent us for taking away your empire. This is the first real thing I've done in 20 years. Everything else was just playing the role my father wrote for me." She searched his eyes, looking for the lie, for the crack in the facade. Found only truth, and kissed him. It wasn't the passionate kiss of lovers reuniting. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in desire. It was tentative, careful, a question mark instead of an exclamation point. But it was a beginning. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I'm still scared. So am I. I'm still angry about what you said, about how you made me feel. You should be. I was cruel. I was wrong. And I'm sorry doesn't fix that. No, she agreed. It doesn't. But showing up does. Staying does. Choosing us every single day, that might. He pulled her closer, rested his forehead against hers. Then that's what I'll do. Every single day for the rest of my life. Behind them, Kofi started crying. Then Kwame joined in, not to be left out. Amara laughed, the sound watery but genuine. Welcome to fatherhood. It's loud and messy and you'll never sleep again. Sounds perfect. And for the first time since he'd signed those divorce papers, since he'd thrown away the only real thing he'd ever had, Jaewon felt like he was home. Not in a mansion or an office or an empire, but here, with 3 tiny boys who needed him, and a woman who was learning to trust him again. One day at a time, one choice at a time. One smile, even if it was just gas, at a time.